What's going on? You're listening to This Is Not Reality. I'm your host, Amber. Don't forget to follow and subscribe to this show wherever you're listening so that you're notified every time a new episode drops. I love to see people listening to the show, so if you are, go ahead and tag me in your post and I will repost it because I think that's just super dope. Let's spread the love. I got another conversation for you guys this week. Someone exploring the constant question, the central theme of this show. What is the relationship between our personal narratives and the cultural narratives that we are embedded within? Yes, poetry snaps. I was joined by Rachel Domond, who is an artist and an organizer for the Party for Socialism and Liberation. The Party for Socialism and Liberation is a revolutionary Marxist party here in the United States. Their Instagram is PSL Web. The local chapter is Boston PSL on Instagram. And you can also visit their website, www.pslweb.org. One of the main reasons why I created this platform is because there's a lot of information going around right now, and I just want my listeners to be able to hear some of these ideas introduced by people that look like them, people that look like us, people who are from the places that we come from. And so I invited Rachel with a very deliberate intention that she is a perfect voice and the identity that I would prefer to introduce my audience to socialism with, rather than the white and super academic way that I was introduced to it and the way that this country is trying to introduce it to us. And I thank her. I thank her eternally. Don't forget to follow Rachel on Instagram at Muvagaia, Muvagaia on Instagram, and tag us in your post if you're listening. That's Amber's Afro, AMBERSAFRO. Enjoy the interview. I noticed, I was looking at your Instagram, I noticed that you recently finished a mural. I saw some prints that you made. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking about the work that you do right now at PSL. Mm-hmm. And I'm just like, based on your relationship to school growing up, from like high school to college, did you see yourself doing the work that you do right now?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, growing up, like, do you mean in terms of my artistry and my organizing?
Both.
Okay.
Start with whichever one you want, yeah.
Word, okay. I mean, I feel like they're very intertwined. I don't really like to separate my art from the politics that I engage with in organizing. Mm-hmm. I grew up with a single mom who worked her ass off, and I started working when I was like 15 years old, at the grocery store, trying to support myself a bit, and eventually sort of like worked through college, like supported myself through college as well.
See, I didn't have a job when I was 15. Like, my dad was like, focus on school,
Yeah.
So I feel like that must have been crazy because you're still having to meet your grades, but now you're like, I have to go to this job.
Yeah. Every day after school, 3 to 9 p.m.
That's weird, though. You still have to do your homework.
Right, exactly. But yeah, so I mean, I've been working since as early as I could, really, and I think we're often told, like, this idea of you work hard and you'll achieve success, right? Mm-hmm. Like, that's often what we think. If you go to school, if you go to college, you'll enjoy success. You'll have a successful life, you'll have a successful job, get a house, the whole cookie-cutter lifestyle that we're always told to believe in. And I think just, seeing my mom, the way she worked and struggled, like me busting my ass in school, like working and struggling, seeing people around me struggling, like, it really didn't equate for me, that like...
They're working hard.
Exactly. Right. People are working hard and are struggling, can't pay rent, like, don't have health insurance, etc. So I think through those experiences, through life experience, really, like, I was really just politicized, and also just like things happen in the world. Like, I don't know if you remember, I think like 5 years ago, University of Missouri, there was like some racist stuff happening there, and like the football team was protesting, and it was like a really big moment for Black students, like across the United States. And I think that and just everything, I started to put together that, like, life doesn't need to be this way. Clearly there's something inherently wrong with the system that we live in. And yeah, like, I want to do my part in fighting that, you know?
What did that look like, your first experience with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot of ups and downs, a lot of like learning through the process. I mean, I started organizing on my college campus at Northeastern. You know, doing student organizing around gentrification. You know, Northeastern is a big gentrifier of Roxbury.
Heck yeah.
And yeah, just like doing political education, really learning with other people, being in the streets and stuff like that.
And are you out of school now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I graduated. I finished school in this past December.
Oof, okay.
So I did 4.5 years. So it was kind of
Okay. Well, timing. Who even knows these days with schooling? But all we know is that as soon as you left, you were doing that work in the streets as well. So what about art? What is the relationship with art?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've always since I was in high school, I would do creative stuff, you know. But I never really saw myself as an artist. I think that's an interesting relationship. But also, having an art career is not something that's very valued in this society. It's not easy to make it as an artist in this society. So I sort of, set that to the back burner for a long time. Until I think, I started getting more politicized. I started studying the history and, culture and how those things overlap with, politics and resistance movements. And really just started to draw from that. I mean, it started my family is from Haiti. So it started with, looking into the history of that, the resistance struggle of Haiti. Just admiring that culture as a first gen diasporic person. I've never gotten the chance to go to Haiti, but try to channel that.
I feel that too, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know what my motherland looked like.
Exactly.
But
so that's definitely a big thing for me, and how I can use art and culture as a way to connect these ideas to just everyday things, to everyday people, things that people can relate to, you know. And
I saw prints and I saw paintings. Do you are you a printmaker and a painter, or have you committed yourself to those identities?
Yeah, I mean, I call myself a painter and a printmaker, but I feel like it fluctuates a lot. I mean, I primarily do carving and ink block and acrylic paint, but I recently did my first mural. I've done some other public art. I play with different mediums, I guess, and I think it's all sort of an artistic process, you know. Banners, for example, is that's not something making banners for a protest. That's not necessarily...
People don't look at that as art.
Yeah, but that's art,
you know? Design. You need to be able to make it clear, catch a message, engaging. And it's interesting when you mention, the way that we talk about art, whether you are an artist or have an art career, is people are looking for certain signs, you know? They want to already be able to perceive you a certain way so that you can fall in line with, oh, that is an artist. Oh, they do have an art career because they're doing ABC.
Exactly.
When in reality, it's a bunch of artists that are becoming... I mean, this is my interpretation. I'm that person made a bunch of art. People liked it. They sold it. And they kind of just kept on going. It's not a thing that, you achieve and you're there. It's just, this process. And you're making art and you're selling it and you're working on your marketing. And I feel when you talk about these things, and the whole point of this podcast is just, get rid of the illusion. Get rid of the mystique. Okay, we have these ideas of what an art career is, what an artist is, but this is what I did. I made a mural, I print make, I think about the relationship between the stories. Being an artist is such a broad thing. So.
Yeah, and it's ever evolving as well. You're not stuck. It's not stationary by any means, you know.
For sure. Let me pull up this description because I actually do want to reference the mission of the PSL, the Party for Socialism and Liberation, which you are a member of. Because you're kind of my first time being brave enough or courageous enough to really explore these ideas because of the way that the country and history has framed socialism. So thank you for being here for me.
Of course.
The Party for Socialism and Liberation, I'm reading from the website, believes that the only solution to the deepening crisis of capitalism is a socialist transformation of society. Driven by an insatiable appetite for greater profits, regardless of social cost, capitalism is on a collision course with the people of the world and the planet itself. Imperialist war, deepening unemployment and poverty, deteriorating healthcare, housing and education, racism, discrimination and violence based on gender and sexual orientation, environmental destruction, all are inevitable products of the capitalist system itself. So it seems like it's about transforming society, and really by attacking capitalism, the beast of capitalism. So in your perspective, what is socialism to you, or what should we know about it? Is it different from communism also?
Okay, yeah, I can talk to both of those things. Yeah, I mean, we are so often indoctrinated with anti-socialism ideas. You know, we're taught to fear these things, that they're just like foreign menaces. There was a whole Cold War over it, right?
Right.
But really, socialism is just means to me, I mean, it depends who you ask. It depends who you ask to get a definition of it. But to me and to the PSL, it means just putting power into the hands of the people who make the society run. So, I mean, Fred Hampton, chairman of the Black Panther Party, late chairman of the Black Panther Party, he said, if you're scared of socialism, you're scared of yourself. And I think that's a very telling quote because, we're just beaten down in this society. Like, we are exploited of our labor. We are, indoctrinated with these ideas to hate each other all the time based on just like characteristics of ourselves, of our race, our gender, our ability, our sexuality, etc. And we go to work every day and we make bosses like profits, like huge, immense profits. And what do we see in return? We see nothing, we see struggle, and we see, just like a deepening crisis all around us. Our family's struggling, the planet is struggling, like, we're continuing to go deeper into war with other nations. And people don't have what they need. And socialism is really, just like putting the political power of society in the hands of the working class people who make the society run, and planning ahead of time. So we have the adequate resources and know how to distribute them. So people have their basic minimum needs met, like housing is something that's guaranteed. Like a right to a job is something guaranteed. Education, healthcare, all of that stuff.
Yeah. I think it's like, it really dares you to be creative, to reimagine. For some people, it might seem almost unnatural or impossible that any power could be in the hands of the working class. Yeah.
And I think that's exactly what Fred Hampton speaks to in his quote. Like, it's easy to be scared of that. That's like a huge task, and we're often, as I mentioned, beat down and told that, we work de-skilled jobs and we don't have the capacity or the capabilities to be in power and to, have control and sovereignty over our own lives. When in reality we do, and we can own and build that power together.
So where do all the other countries that often get roped into the socialist conversation fall? For example, Central American countries or South American countries or even some Asian countries. Is it the same thing?
Yeah, so, I mean...
Yes or no?
Yeah, like...
because I'm sure they're different countries. Let's just start there. Different cultures, different countries, different histories.
Yes, exactly. But I think a common thread is that, it's hard to group regions together, right? Because, like, you look at Latin America and there's complete different, countries on complete different ends of the spectrum. So you have countries like Brazil, for example, which is, like, completely right-wing and is propped up by the U.S. government, like, coups and what have you, with corrupt dictators in power. And then you have countries like Cuba and Venezuela and Bolivia, which are embodiments of a socialist project. I mean, I wouldn't say that they are necessarily fully realized socialism right now, because socialism is a process. Like, it's not like you're going to snap your fingers and working class people are going to be in power and then all of a sudden you're good. But it's a process of defending that and building and, breaking down centuries of racism and sexism, etc. So yeah, I mean, there's no country in the global north that necessarily has socialism, but there are many countries across the global south that, embody socialism, that are putting socialism into motion in their own nations. like, you know, Venezuela, Bolivia, China, like Vietnam, Cuba, etc. And we're just taught to fear them. We're told all of this propaganda that, you know, they ain't shit, basically, that they're violent, that they're dangerous, when in reality they're just doing right by themselves.
Let's follow up on that thought, because even myself, so I'm gonna be honest, I've only seen selective things from the media. Yeah, and some of those would lead me to believe some negative things about some countries that are socialist.
Of course.
So what do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions that we hear about socialism?
Yeah, so I mean, the first thing that I will mention that I think is often told is that socialism is just this white man's concoction, right? Like, you know, it's not for people of color, it's not for oppressed people, it's this distant ideology that, like, it's hard to you know, conceptualize, and it's hard to actually relate to our personal lives, as, you know, oppressing people of color.
As Trump would say, socialism, like, it's not that deep.
Exactly.
Right.
But when you look at history and you look at revolutions that have happened across the world, across Asia, across Africa, across Latin America, they have all really embodied and, like, practiced Marxism. They have strove for socialism. You know, within their national struggles, and I think their national liberation struggles. So I think that completely breaks it down. Like, for example, the Black Panther Party. Everyone loves the Black Panther Party, the image of the Black Panther Party, but they were socialists. They were fighting for socialism. And I think that's very often swept under the rug. And particularly with the Black Panthers, like, are just made to seem violent and completely unfounded in, like, you know, the work that they're doing.
So you sweep all that up. So, speaking more about countries that are socialist, maybe I'm wrong. And I was doing some research before our interview, and it turned out, for example, I think it was like Sweden is often called socialist, but it actually isn't fully socialist. And so, a lot of the times we look at these European countries as almost models for, like, possibly good socialism, I'm assuming. So, with that in mind, do you think it's appropriate to call these countries socialist, first off? And does it make sense for the American working class to look at those as role models in any way?
Yeah, I mean, I will start off by saying that there, as I mentioned before, there is no country in the global north, you know, the quote-unquote Western powers, that is socialist, right? Like, Sweden, Denmark, Norway, all these places are capitalist countries, but they just happen to have very comprehensive social welfare programs. So the United States, for example, with FDR, had the New Deal policy, which was like an expanded social welfare program, programming for working class people. And of course, it alleviates some of the harms and struggles that working class people face, but realistically only temporarily. I think it's important to note that, like, in countries like Denmark, Sweden, and Norway, like, while working class people are benefiting from those social welfare programs, like, the capitalist class in those countries is still reaping the profits and and, like, you know, ultimately gaining from that. Like, socialism is about power. Who has power? And in none of those countries do the working class people have power. And I think, like, we even see globally, like, the ruling class in those countries are still extracting resources and such from countries in the global south, in order to subsidize their programs, to have materials, etc.
Talk about it.
But what I will say is that I think, like, these countries are, as I'm saying, these countries are capitalist, and their working class is, you know, doing moderately better, and it just sort of shows how bad the situation is in the United States. Like, we don't even have social programming, like social welfare programs that are the bare minimum, you know, and it sort of just exacerbates the crisis that exists here when we can see, like, well, they can do that. Like, I mean, yeah, it just really damns the U.S., I guess, a lot more.
You explained that so well. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah.
So I am someone who, I studied communication in college, and so I'm always looking at the internet and how we communicate in small groups, large groups, as a nation, as a company, as a relationship, an interpersonal relationship, all types of communication. And social media is just one fascinating place. So AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, there we go, got them all in. She has become kind of like a public figure for socialism or socialist democracy. I don't even know if I'm saying
Democratic
that right.
socialism.
Democratic socialism. See, thank you. And then also Bernie Sanders was kind of like the first person to really get out into the public scene. And then she kind of like took the baton and carried it to, I think, a more younger, more progressive crowd. What do you think about the way that they have introduced socialism to the public?
Yeah, I mean, I think AOC and Bernie have, I don't necessarily agree with all of the things that they say about socialism, their versions of socialism, nor do I think that socialism will be won through the Democratic Party or through the electoral process. I don't necessarily think that is how we're going to completely overthrow, like, centuries of oppression and capitalism.
It doesn't make sense. It just literally does. Like, let's still keep this structure, but we're gonna change it.
Exactly. But what I will say is that I think it's sort of it's demonstrated a completely new leaf in terms of the movement in society, in like how society in the United States is thinking about the term socialism. Like, I don't even know how many years ago, but like a couple decades ago, socialism was something that you could not say ever. Yeah. Like, people were persecuted. Like, people were executed literally for being socialists, charged with heinous crimes. And I think the fact that like we had a presidential candidate on the ballot in the mainstream specifically who like was using the platform of democratic socialism, in like hundreds of millions of people were like, or not maybe hundreds of millions, but millions of people were in support of that. Right. Like, that's wild. Like, that's so important, I think. And I think really just the task is sort of to think about like, okay, well, what actually is socialism? Like, clarifying what it actually means and what it's going to take to get there. Because while I do think like, there were some things that, may have been said that I think are things that we want to embody, like, for example, Medicare for all or healthcare for all. They're not necessarily going to be realized under the current state of society and under capitalism.
I'm almost curious what you don't agree with in their definition. Or is it just like a sentiment? Like, what is it?
I think there's a lot of things, but for example, their international policy, I think, is a very big one. When I think of socialism, there's so many different facets of it. National liberation and ending, combating racism. There's anti-imperialism, which is like, defending the sovereignty and rights of other countries. And I think, honestly, like the foreign policy, I don't know every single, in and out of that, but I do think that it was more aligned with the banks and the corporations in the United States than it was in the sovereignty of, oppressed people across the globe, which I think is a very big one.
I like how you look at that. It can be bigger than the national struggle, and there are so many different variables. So the Trump administration has been kind of like taking advantage of that negative perception of socialism that existed forever. His whole campaign strategy, the first one and this one, just feels so outdated, and I don't understand what generation or year he thinks he's talking to, but whatever. Like, it's just crazy. Anyway, he's been talking about socialism, and he's been kind of demonizing colleges as being anti-American, and a lot of the policies and programs, he's like getting rid of them. Anything that that relies on critical race theory, for example, he's just like, that's anti-American. And a lot of people are saying that about colleges, but liberal arts colleges in general. Now, I went to a liberal arts college. Is Northeastern liberal arts?
I don't know, but I study sociology.
So yeah. Right. And I studied social science, so I feel like every class that I took in college kind of did tie everything back to Karl Marx, or Marxism, as like this point where there was a shift in Western culture. But like, how do you view Karl Marx's legacy in terms of socialism in America today? Yeah. In general.
Yeah, in general, I mean, I'm a Marxist. I definitely had studied Marx in college as well, a lot of sociology, social theory classes, and he sort of just presented as like another stream of thought, but really, I do think Marx is like very important and very relevant to the struggle for socialism today, and just the struggle for liberation in general, because I think what Marx really provided us is a way to analyze society. And that is that the history of like society up until this point is just a history of class struggle, meaning the struggle and movement between opposing classes. So for example, we had feudalism. In feudalism, it was the serfs versus the landlords, or the landowning class, what have you. And the struggle for liberation and from that sort of led us to slavery, or chattel slavery specifically. Where it's like enslaved Africans and slave catchers and slave owners. The shift from that, in which it led us to more of an industrialized society. Industrial capitalism led us to where we are today. Of course, it's shifted a bit over time, but I think we see that it's not. I think especially during this time, many people are thinking it's like black people against white people, when in reality, it's the capitalists against the working class, the people who privately own, what is called like the means of production and like our jobs, who make all the money off of us as the workers. It's really us. It's that, and that's what the class struggle is.
I feel as though learning about Marxism changed my life. I got exposed to it early in art school at Boston Arts Academy, but it changed my life. It changed my life, and I don't know why, and I'm very much, the whole podcast and everything in my life in general is very talk therapy-esque, where it's just a matter of having an ability to explore a narrative is such a valuable tool to me. And so just being able to look at myself in this country from that perspective, it's informed everything that I've done since then. And so I'm not surprised when I hear that a lot of activists, maybe even the Black Panther Party, was seeing the utility of all of these strategies for us.
Exactly. It's a way to just analyze and apply it to your own conditions, because what was happening in Germany when Karl Marx is writing isn't necessarily the same, but there are patterns that we can see and learn from, in terms of how we think about moving forward in our society, and fighting for something better.
Yeah. So I read a little bit of the mission of the PSL, but I just wanted to list a couple of the things that are in that paragraph, because it just feels as though because you're committed to replacing capitalism or transforming the society, you end up fighting several fights at once. Imperialist war, deepening unemployment and poverty, deteriorating healthcare, housing, and education, racism, discrimination and violence based on gender and sexual orientation, environmental destruction. How is the organization structured to be able to tackle all of those things?
Yeah, definitely. I hear that. It's a lot, but I think it's all necessary, because all of these issues, racism, the climate, further war, is all stems from the fact that we live in a capitalist society. I mean, people who, like, racism is a tool to be used to keep us as the working class divided from each other. So we have so much inter-conflict that we could never be united, at least as long as we don't sort of break that down a bit. The fact that the climate is, just in like a lot of, like, our planet is in immense danger, and that's because, corporations and what have you are just ravaging the earth. We continue to have wars because, there are fights between the rulers of countries, and they use working class people as the pawns to fight each other. And it's like, it's not our fight.
Right.
It's their fight for resources and for wealth.
It's like we asked that question in like kindergarten. We're like, wait a minute, what is war? How does this make sense? I didn't do it. But it's like we keep it going, and somehow here we are.
Exactly. Right. And I think, we tackle all of these because, like, people know what they experience. They know they experience the oppressive conditions of racism, of no healthcare, of what have you, housing, etc. And in order to really draw the connections between all of these things is how we're gonna get there. That's why we try to engage in all of those things. And I think, to speak to our structure a bit, how we sort of tackle this, we're a national organization. We're a revolutionary socialist party, right? And we're not just a loose grouping of people who want to change the world and make it a better place. We are just a grouping of, very disciplined and dedicated organizers who actually see the work that we're doing now as connected to our larger goal of like having a revolution, you know. That's what we're doing right here. Like, there's no better time than right now to start building and preparing and being organized and being disciplined, in terms of, you know, fighting the good fight.
Right.
And I think specifically what I'll speak to, I'm not sure if you read this, but we're a democratic centralist organization, which means basically like we have an elected leadership, we have a unified program, which is something that we all sort of abide by. We move as a unit. Like, we're able to, because that's how our organization is structured, we're able to, you know, act very quickly and rapidly in terms of like when there's a new crisis, when there's something that we need to respond to. And I think like, yeah, it's important to note, like, how else can we take down this oppressive structure that has existed for centuries, that is so centralized, that is so just like refined in how it oppresses us, unless we are also just as organized, if not more, you know? So that's sort of generally how we operate and how we move from struggle to struggle and you know, deepen our engagement in particular areas.
Yeah, that same root of capitalism.
Yeah.
So, speaking of there's no better time than now, I don't know what you meant by that, but I just want to address the fact that we're sitting at a reasonable distance with masks on and there's sanitizer on the table, because we are in the middle of a pandemic.
Right.
And I feel as though, shout out to COVID. No, not shout out. Go away. Anyway, right now is a weird time in America and life in general. And it feels like something is coming. Either like a really big change, like the end of the world or an apocalypse, or a positive revolution, right? I don't know. I've been more optimistic than pessimistic this whole shutdown. Nice, because I do see this as an opportunity to, like, I don't know, organize, or we're not at work. There's just a different sense of connection right now, especially when we saw the protests, the George Floyd protests and Breonna Taylor. It just seemed like I had a little bit more hope this year than any other year in our ability to organize. How have the election, the pandemic, and all of the civil unrest impacted your movement and your prospects for the future?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you're feeling at least more optimistic than pessimistic. I tend to feel very optimistic because I think all of these, you know, it's inevitable. Like, we live in a society where there's always going to be crises that pop up. Of course, we can't necessarily always predict what it's going to be. But there's always going to be crisis, and crisis is when people's consciousness and when people's understanding of the world and, like, you know, the shit is fucked up, basically, to say frankly, like, accelerates, you know? Like, yes, we're in a global pandemic. Yes, like, we're going through this another shitty ass election cycle. There's anti-racist mobilizations across the country, and police are being mobilized to brutalize people. Meanwhile, we don't have a public health response still. Like, we're literally 8 months into this pandemic. We had a warning that the pandemic was coming, and we weren't prepared in any way. Like, the eviction moratorium was just lifted, and people are gonna start being evicted en masse out of their homes, like, in winter, in a pandemic. Like, it's I think it's really just, like, opening up people's eyes to the fact that, like, this system is not made to give us our basic needs, and that it's no way to protect us in crises. Like, if something else happened right now, like, you know,
like, bro,
like, we're literally in a pandemic in the most powerful country in the world, and hundreds of thousands of people are dying, and, like, people don't have what they need. And I think I'm looking at it as sort of a heightened crisis that is really just exposing the truths of, you know, capitalism and the way that profit takes precedent over people's lives, even further. And that, you know, the police are just agents to repress us, you know, like, on behalf of those who are in power. And Yeah, so it's sort of like a dress rehearsal for what's to come, because it's inevitable that these are just going to continue to escalate.
This is what it looks like when the structure ain't working well, when the system is caught up, you know? So when it gets worse, like, you know, we have to be able to see these things coming and rely on our local leaders and activists to organize and help us and support them as well. Yes. But speaking of all of the variables, I'm like, really? On top of everything, it's an election year. And I'm just curious, right. What are your thoughts about the current election and the future of the two-party system? Because I know that you were talking about how, like, Bernie running as a Democrat, trying to push some socialist ideas, like, it wasn't necessarily, it didn't look like what you imagined the revolution would look like. Or it doesn't make sense to work within that two-party system. So what are you thinking after this year?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say straight up, for the record, the two-party system is a complete sham. It's literally just these two parties, the Democratic and Republican Party, who are just representing the interests of corporations, of banks, of polluters, etc. Like, they don't have any, like, they turn around and do us dirty every single time. Like, no matter what side they're repping, they never follow through. And that's just the reality. Like, their job is to stabilize society in a way that, like, pacifies us, basically.
Yeah.
And to make sure that the capitalist system is stable enough.
This might be the opportunity for me to get this definition. Neoliberalism, is that kind of what it is? I feel like nobody really knows, but, like, I feel like that's what I imagine a neoliberal to be, like. You're democratic, but you're still, like, pushing capitalistic, like, things, but, like, it looks different? I don't know.
Yeah, it's just sort of the uplifting of the free market and, like, free market principles, so that, like, everything is to be made a profit out of. Like, everything is to be exploited, both here and abroad.
Oh, okay.
You know?
So, in terms of voting and elections, I don't know, like, how do you... It's like almost like, I'm like, my father always told me, you're not supposed to tell people who you're voting for, you're not supposed to sway people, you're not supposed to talk about voting, but it's at this point now that I'm just like, what do we do?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, we're always told to vote for the lesser of two evils. Like, we literally see that every single election. Last year, this year, it's, oh, we can't have Trump, so we just need to choose the lesser of two evils. When in reality, they're not on our side either. Like, Joe Biden is, I mean, I'll just share some thoughts of how I feel about him. Like, he could give two shits about us. In some ways, I honestly think he's worse than Donald Trump. Not to say that I don't think Trump is bad, because I definitely do. But, like, Joe Biden acts like he's our friend and isn't. You know, like, the topic of the moment right now is the fact that the police are brutalizing people in the streets. Just for standing up for justice, and he gets up and says, oh, I support the police. Like, you know, I think that they're doing exactly what they should be, like, beating people's asses in the streets and pepper spraying people just for having peaceful protests. Like, it's really just...
I feel like I've heard him do that thing where he's kind of trying to, like, what do you call it when you're kind of trying to pander, I guess, to a certain group? Yeah. Saying what they want to hear. I've caught that sense from him a little bit.
Exactly. Like, if you don't vote for Joe Biden, you're not black.
Oh, my God. Like, don't remind me of that.
Like, what has he done to deserve our support? Like, literally nothing. And I understand people are scared right now, but it's like, people are scared every single year because we're just wrapped up in this cycle of choosing between the lesser of two evils, quote unquote, against the quote unquote boogeyman who's in the race. So it's time to consider something new,
right,
you know?
Like, right, to consider something new. So do you feel like you put more of your energy and your faith into the organizing and the possibility of a revolution rather than the voting and the election?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, I don't think the elections are anything that can be ignored, because that's where most people are right now, and I think that's a way for people to, you know, be politicized further and be exposed to ideas that they wouldn't otherwise have. So, for example, the Party for Socialism and Liberation is running a candidate who is on the ballot in 15 states across the United States, and a write-in candidate in 14 additional states, Gloria La Riva, and her vice president, Sunil Freeman. And they are really just... I mean, we acknowledge, as I mentioned before, that the change that we need is not going to be made through elections, but, like... Gloria La Riva is there to provide a genuine socialist alternative to, like, what the Democratic and Republican parties are sort of pressing onto us, you know? You know, she's literally been in the streets, like, fighting the good fight, like, talking with people. Like, she acknowledges that we need to cancel rents and mortgages right now, like, that we need an end to police brutality and police terror. We need an end to racism and sexism. We need to cancel student debt. Like,
please.
You know, that's her program, literally. And I think, like, yeah, I mean, that's sort of, like, where I will put my energy with the election.
Right. And I know that writing in ballots and stuff, they don't have all the ads on TV and everything or on the internet. So shout out to Gloria, was it?
Gloria Lariva, yeah. We were out there, like, getting those signatures.
Here goes the promotion. Everybody go ahead and check her out. Yes. So I feel like we're getting to an end of this conversation, and I want to just thank you for having this conversation with me, enlightening me on a lot of the questions I've been wondering about. But I do wonder, just personally, artistically, in your own life, what's next for you? It's a weird question during the pandemic, right?
Question.
Are you even thinking about that?
Yeah, I guess I'm like, I mean, as an organizer, I think it's necessary to be looking sort of 3, 4, 5 steps ahead. But then again, there's some things that we can't always predict, and it's necessary to be able to sort of act on a dime, you know, like, you know, responding to the moment and responding to, you know, people's needs and what people are thinking about, what's on people's minds. I mean, so personally, I mean, I'm continuing to organize, preparing for the fallout of the elections, because it's bound to be people in the streets.
Is that the next thing? Like, you're organizing literally, physically, or is there anything sooner? I feel like you probably are always busy.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm working with this campaign, Cancel the Rents Boston, which is focused, I mean, I live in Roxbury. It's focusing on, you know, Roxbury, Dorchester area between Nubian and Grove Hall, just working to build a movement of people to, you know, fight against the evictions and demand that Governor Baker cancels the rents, because people can't pay. Yeah. And just because the moratorium is lifted, like, doesn't mean people are all of a sudden going to have the money that they didn't have for 8 months, you know? So, I mean, that's sort of on the organizing side of things. And yeah, I think just continuing to hopefully utilize my art as another just element in that organizing, as a tool as well.
And I just to go back to the printmaking, I always just loved Googling things about the Black Panther Party or any of those movements and seeing the flyers, seeing the pamphlets, seeing the prints, and how useful that technique was just for us to get the message out when we didn't have the means. Yeah. So deep. So I think it all comes full circle with you. Thank you again for coming through.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
For anyone who's still here listening, thank you so much. Once again, go ahead and follow and subscribe so you can get notified the next time an interview drops. I know you are into the gems. I know you're here for it. Please support. Please subscribe on social media. And again, if you enjoyed any parts of this interview, please go ahead and share it, tag us in it. I'll see you guys next time. Actually, I won't, but I tend to say things that don't make sense on these podcasts. But I'm here, and I'll be back again. Bye.